How about living at my place? She said it as casually as if inviting me to lunch. I was at a loss for words. After all, she, Susan, was my team leader at my previous company, and then she became my employer. This was about a year ago. The beginning of the story goes back another 3 months. That morning, as soon as I arrived at the office, the department head summoned me in an irritated voice. "Hey Mike, what on earth is this?" As I walked over to his desk, he threw a catalog of new cell phone covers on the desk. Looking at it, there was a cell phone cover design identical to the one I had previously completed. "You said you wanted to redo it, even though you got the go-ahead last time, didn't you?" "Yes, that's because I came up with a better idea, and so, I discussed it with the leader and..." "Did you really sell your design elsewhere?" "No way, that's impossible." But here it was, my rejected design being manufactured by another company. I had no idea why. I looked around for my team leader, Susan, for help. Then I remembered that she was on a business trip out of town until tomorrow. "You're fired, effective today." Termination of contract means I'm fired. I was falsely accused and suddenly kicked out of the company. I work as a product designer. Product designers design all sorts of products, from household goods and daily necessities to industrial machinery. Some manufacturers have in-house designers, but others outsource the design to design firms. I used to be responsible for product planning at a manufacturer, placing design orders. But eventually, I became interested in design itself, quit my job, and studied design at a vocational school before being hired as a contract employee at the design agency. And then, I got fired. As I was packing up my belongings at my desk, I was approached in whispered voices from both sides. They were Ken and John, who became contract employees around the same time as me, but in different teams. Both were concerned about me. As I explained the situation, Ken looked at my face and asked, "Did you really sell it?" John said, "No way, it must be some mistake." "Well, it's fine. I wanted to work on something bigger anyway." I pretended to have a lot of leeway at best, and I said things that were mindless. On my way home, I stopped at a nearby convenience store and bought some beer and snacks. I was drinking at home out of frustration. I started drinking while the sun was still up and was completely drunk by evening. "Mike, you're home early, and why are you already drunk?" My live-in girlfriend, Emily, had returned from work. When I told her that I had been fired, she heaved a big sigh and said, "I told you over and over to give up on being a designer." I met Emily at the manufacturer I used to work for. She still works there. She strongly opposed my career change, insisting that it would be more stable if I stayed with a large company. When I did change jobs, there was a gap between Emily and me. "Shut up, I wanted to be a designer. What's wrong with that?" In the end, was I wrong or was I mistaken? I drank myself into oblivion, my head spinning, and I ended up passing out. The next day, I slept until just before noon. On the living room floor, Emily had already gone to work. As I was drinking a glass of water just after waking up, the doorbell rang. When I opened the front door, there stood my team leader, Susan. "Oh, just woke up, you look awful." "Why, I'm coming in." She didn't wait for my response and just barged into the room. "A bit of drowning your sorrows last night." She said this after seeing the large number of empty beer cans left on the table. "Well, something like that. I'm going on a binge eat right now. It's lunchtime anyway. Come on, I've bought loads down at the town square. Let's eat together." Honestly, I had no appetite, but I had no choice but to say yes. More importantly, why? I quit the company too. "What, why? Is that all you can say? Why?" She laughed as she said this, looking at my surprised face. She had finished a business trip and had gone to the office that morning, where she was informed about the termination of my contract and the reason for it. And she had gotten into an argument with the boss. She insisted that there's no way I would sell my designs to another company, but the boss was adamant that my designs had actually been productized. In the end, he rebuked her as team leader, saying, "You've been negligent in your supervision." He said I was negligent, so I said, "Then I'll take responsibility," and I quit. She said this robustly while biting into a fried chicken drumstick. So now, because of me, you too have been at odds with that hard-headed man for a while now. She then looked at me seriously, adjusting her posture. You just left your job yesterday, and you haven't decided on your next job yet, right? Yes, I have no prospects. Then, work with me. Work with you. I couldn't grasp the meaning, so she explained. She had decided to take this opportunity to start her own design firm. She had been considering going independent and had saved up for it. The salary might be lower at first, but only for a little while. Just bear with it. In other words, she wanted me to be the first employee of her new design company. Sure, if you want me, she thanked me and offered both her greasy hands for a handshake. I shook her hands, though somewhat bewildered. Her hands were sticky from the fried chicken. Honestly, I was puzzled as to why she had invited me to be her first employee. Until then, she had been giving various orders to other team members, juggling multiple projects, but rarely giving me advice, assigning me only one project at a time. I had always thought that I was neither expected nor evaluated. Now, even though she said she was starting a company, her home apartment served as both an office and a residence for the time being. It's all about cutting costs. Speaking of cutting costs, instead of relying on a lawyer for the company's registration, Susan did it herself by going to the local legal office. Of course, she was also running around for sales activities alongside that. Her past achievements paid off, and we were inundated with jobs for designs. And I worked selflessly on those jobs. Sometimes work ended late at night, and I often stayed over at her home, which also served as the office. The company's name is S&T Design. When I showed the business card of the newly formed company to Emily a few days after returning home, she said it with a bored look. What's her name again? Susan. Susan, so the S is for Susan, and the T is because you're Tom, so it's Susan and Tom then. Emily flicked the business card she was holding onto the table and glared at me. What is it? Nothing. Just thought you two must be getting along well. Emily was clearly jealous. She misunderstood the relationship between her and me in a strange way. We were only work partners, her and me. Since then, there was not just a gap between Emily and me, but a deep rift. Sometime later, on a Saturday, I had stayed over for 2 days and was catching up on the backlog of work. It was almost done. How about taking off early today when you reach a good stopping point? Susan seemed to care about me, struggling just a bit more, and wanted me to go home early. I'll manage to finish by tonight. Come on, you're overworking. Go home now. This an order from your boss. I was patted on the shoulder by her and decided to wrap up work. I was about to call Emily, who was supposed to be home, but stopped. I wanted to surprise her by coming home unexpectedly. I stopped by Emily's favorite bakery and bought a surprise cake as a gift. I opened the front door without making a noise. There were men's shoes I didn't recognize. I thought we had a visitor. I could hear the sound of a comedy show from the TV in the living room. But there was no sign of the visitor, Emily, in the living room. Where's Emily? I opened the door to the bedroom. Emily was asleep on the bed, her head resting on the chest of a man I didn't know. Emily, no, what? Why are you back? The man hurriedly got dressed, said something cheeky like "see you later" to Emily, and hurried out. Emily sat on the bed with a sullen face, wrapped in a blanket. I threw the cake in its box at Emily, crammed my belongings into my backpack, and yelled, "I'll come back for the rest of my stuff later. I'll let you know before I come." I stormed out. I wandered the streets with nowhere to go. Of course, I couldn't possibly go back and stay at work. I thought about calling Ken or John, my fellow contract workers, and telling them what had happened. What am I going to say? That I broke up with the girl I was living with and moved out? Certainly, then no doubt they would interrogate me, digging into every detail. Even I'm hurt by all of this. Drinking some booze and talking, I'm sure I'll end up crying. Eventually, I decided to stay in a comic book cafe I happened to notice until Monday morning. "Oh, were you off camping for the weekend?" she said on Monday, noticing my backpack as I was heading to work. "No, I've moved out of the house." "Did you have a fight with her?" "We broke up." She looked shocked for a moment, then said, "I don't know the details," but as a preface, and then casually said, "Why don't you live at my place?" As I hesitated, she added, "I don't mind at all. After all, you've stayed over plenty of times before." But that was for work. Never mind that. I found this old business card while I was sorting through some things. Look at this. The card she handed me was from when I was in charge of product planning at a manufacturer. "Why do you have this?" "We exchanged cards a long time ago. You don't remember, do you? I was at the design company before the one I'm at now." I had no memory of it, but she had been in charge of the design when my company had hired her. Usually, we would have multiple meetings to finalize the design, including the concept and functionality of the product. I made a few revisions to the rough sketch, and the design was pretty much settled, but you, a rookie, came to observe the meeting. I was trying to recall the time while listening to her story. "When we exchanged business cards, you were so stiff, barely looking at anyone's face, and your hands were shaking. I wondered if you were going to be okay as a newbie," she said with a chuckle. I could only respond with an embarrassed smile, feeling both pathetic and ashamed. At the end of the meeting, someone said, "Mike, tell us your thoughts. You were so nervous that her voice was cracking, and you said something completely off the wall, but it was something none of us would have ever thought of." I thought, what's with this amateur? What kind of ridiculous thing had I said? I couldn't remember. I thought that, but at the same time, I wondered where such an idea had come from, which I couldn't do. I thought. I was frustrated. If this guy gets involved in design, won't it be something incredible? I can't lose to him. With that, she stood up from her chair. I looked down, embarrassed. "The point is, we've known each other for a long time, so it's fine. Don't worry about it, just live here." The punchline of the story being that I should live here was confusing, but it somehow made me feel inclined to agree. "Oh, but you'll have to see something awful every morning." "What is it, exactly?" "My face without makeup." I stayed at her house as a temporary place to live until I could find a new home. The layout had a living and dining room used as an office and her bedroom, plus one more room. She suggested I use that room, but I declined, opting to lay out a sleeping bag on the living room floor when I slept. We sometimes ate together, and sometimes separately, but since neither of us cooked much, we ordered delivery or ate food we bought outside. Thus began our strange cohabitation, and about half a month had passed. We were working in the room when her cell phone rang. "Oh, Ken, long time no see." It seemed to be from Ken, my contract colleague. She listened to Ken's story, nodding, and said, "There's always next year. Don't be discouraged." Yell, "He's here, living at my place." "No, it's different. My home is currently a home office and company housing." She said this and hung up, laughing. "Ken, as in that Ken?" "Yes." He says hi. From the conversation, it seemed that Ken knew I was living here. Ken didn't become a full-time employee, just another one-year contract. We had a one-year contract, but one of us had been offered the possibility of being promoted to a full-time position after the term. In my mind, the ranking of excellence was Mike, Ken, and then John. Defying her expectations, this time John got the full-time position. Wait, does that mean in Susan's view, I was the best? "Hey, when you were the leader, you hardly gave me any advice and only assigned me one task at a time, right? What's wrong with that? Does that mean you didn't think much of me?" "Don't be foolish, it's the opposite, actually. The reason she didn't advise me was that there was no need to. She didn't make me multitask because she wanted me to focus on the cases she deemed important or difficult. Hearing that, I felt so happy that I wanted to jump for joy. After that, work went smoothly. Though I was planning to find a new place to live right away, the end of the year was approaching, and I was still living in her apartment. "It's cold today," she said, stamping her feet in front of the space heater after returning from outside. "They say there's a big cold wave coming." Well, I can't be defeated by a cold wave. There's a lot of work ahead. She had secured a new business opportunity upon visiting a client. However, it was a competition with another company. If we won the competition, it would lead to continued orders. The schedule is tight. Only 1 week until the competition, and on top of that, that company will also participate. That company, the company that gave us the opportunity to start our S&T design. She also invited me over, saying she'd gotten interesting news. The designs I had rejected were sold to another design firm by our contract colleague John. In his eagerness to be promoted, he tried to sabotage me to reduce competition. The company that bought the design from John also had other stolen designs and was reported by the client. And thus, John's actions came to light. John was fired just a few months after becoming a full-time employee, and another contract employee, again, became full-time. For the next week, I worked day and night on the design for the competition. The night before the competition, I finally finished the design drawing. I was so relieved that I fell asleep with my head on my desk. "Hey, you'll catch a cold like that." She had been resting in her bedroom and came to check on the workspace, where the lights were still on. "Though I fell asleep, the design is ready, it's right here." She said, "I know," and put her arm under mine to help me stand. "I'm fine, sleeping back. Come here, my bed's warmer." We won the competition. And the company grew. We established a new office and hired about 5 employees. As for me, I'm still living in her house. Not just as a work partner, but as a life partner.